What's going on?
To be with what's right or with what's wrong. That's why we're here at the government station. And let me add, be honest. You're not going to support us behind the scenes. You're either with the people or you're with the institution that is killing the people, that is hurting the community, that has caused this divide. So choose today. Choose today. Are you going to be with what's right or with what's wrong? That's why we're here at the government station. And let me add. These crime watch groups are blowing the dog whistle to get the lynch mob. You need to get your cousins. Go talk to your people. What are you doing? And when Dalal Eid was in his car, what was the first thing folks say after the BCA gunned him down? Well, he had a gun. Well, did he shoot first? Well, why was he there? Who was he with? You start to paint a narrative to devalue this man's life. And we're here to say no more. No more. No more. No more. I don't need to know who you are, what you did, what you got for me to say that you deserve a roof over your head. I don't need to know who you are, what you did, or what you got to say that your life matters. So when you come out here,
Justin Root, Killer Cop, Simon Ray, Boston Police, Bill Nelson,
Yay! Nope.
Rasta Tisa,
Right?
Jay Chauvin,
Nope.
George Floyd,
Nope.
Killer Cop,
Nope.
Killer Cop, yep, Killer Cop, stop being so racist.
What?
Salute all y'all.
Salute, salute, salute.
All right, everyone. Just want to welcome everyone to this episode of the Mass Action Podcast. We have a few special guests with us this week. But first, let me introduce myself. If you don't know who I am, I'm Brock Satter. I'm one of the organizers with Mass Action Against Police Brutality. We've been hosting this podcast every week to give you the best information that you can get on this mass movement around police brutality and racism that is sweeping the country. It's 100% grassroots, by, for, and other movement. And not only are we talking about current events and giving you the latest analysis on unfolding events, but we also delving into historical questions that, are still a big part of the fight that we're facing today, and to draw lessons from those. So along those lines, we have a few guests that can fulfill all those goals that we have. We have a couple guests from the Twin Cities that are going to give us a little update on what's going on there as the country begins to focus more on the Derek Chauvin trial, the police who killed George Floyd. And then also later on in the episode, we're gonna also hear from a longtime veteran of the fight, Mac Warren, who has a an extensive history, and hopefully we'll get into some of that. Uh, Definitely not all of it, but some of it tonight. Um, and in particular, in relationship to Mass Action, a group based here in Boston, Mac played a real central role in the fight against to desegregate the busing, excuse me, the school system through busing that took place in the early and mid '70s here in Boston. So hopefully we're going to get into all of that in a wide open discussion with the audience who's here this week. Um, so we're going to hear from Toshira Garraway as well. She's one of the leaders of families supporting families, one of the most active family groups in Minnesota, advocating on the behalf of families who've been impacted by police violence. So she said she'll be running a little late, so um, we want to begin the podcast first just by getting an update from Mel Reeves, who's one of the leaders of the fight out there in the Twin Cities, and who's been definitely following the Chauvin trial real closely. Um, and so, without any further ado, Mel Reeves, I don't know if you want to give us a few words, a little update on what's going on with the Chauvin trial and everything else in the Twin Cities. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, Heather. No, thank you. I hope everybody's fine. Wish everybody peace. Um, well, Twin Cities has kind of gotten, as some people can guess, things are kind of, you can almost feel the tension in the air. The before the trial began, and I wrote about it. I'm gonna put a plug in for stuff I've written at the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder. If you go to www dot, I think it's www.spokesman-recorder.com, you can see some of the things that I've written about it. And You see that one of the first stories you wrote about about the preparation for the trial was overkill, and I called it violence baiting because it was not just violence baiting, but they were projecting onto the community. The community is violent. I mean, they've got razor wire up, they've got barbed wire, they got like old school moats, fences around the whole Hennepin County Government Center is fenced in. And the only way you can get through it. So people got to work in that building. So every day people go to work, they have to pass this security deal, two security checkpoints. According to where you're going, actually three security checkpoints. So it's it's really really shut down here. Um, can y'all hear me? Am I good still? Am I good? Okay. Um, and So what is going on? You all have watched the trial, and you can see that people are a little upset about potential juror number 76, because what that showed was that this guy was from South Minneapolis. He talked about his experience with the police. He was honest. He said, he had negative experiences with the police, experienced racism. Then he told this poignant story about how when he was young, whenever a black person was killed, the police would ride down the street playing "Another One Bites the Dust" on their stereo. Yeah. When they asked him, like they asked all the other potential jurors, if he could still be fair and impartial, he said yes. He looked him in the eye and he said yes. And The defense struck him, and they tried to just strike him for cause. The judge forced him to take a preemptory strike. But what was fascinating, interesting about it was that the prosecution did not really defend him. And so the question is, why wouldn't the prosecution want somebody who had actual experience with police violence, police misconduct, real life in the neighborhood? Why wouldn't you want somebody like that on the jury? And they didn't really fight for him, and they did not use their Batson challenge, which is a challenge you can use when it appears like the other side is trying to exclude black folks. And in fact, they didn't use the challenge, and the judge commended him because the judge agreed that it was not his race that they would be excluding him for, but his experience. How the hell you separate anybody's experience from their race? So we have a fascinating thing being set up here because they have five people of color, five black people on a jury. Two are African immigrants. One is an older, a black woman who's in her 60s, who has a relative who's a cop. and we have a young mixed black girl. She's from a country town outside Bemidji. If you know anything about Minnesota, it's really country, and everything about her is white. She's totally culturally white. Even in her questioning, she told the defense or the prosecution that she didn't even have any black friends. That she didn't have any friends of color. That she knew about racism, kind of security through one of her friends of color. So that's what's on the jury, and so the bourgeois press is kind of trying to is highlighting the fact that, oh, the jury is diverse, but people are suspicious because, and I just wrote a piece about this, that they wanted a certain kind of black person on jury, an acceptable black. So because of that, folks have their doubts about they had doubts before, but the jury selection has raised even more doubts about whether or not this jury will actually convict Chauvin. So in the meantime, I just got finished writing a piece about what happened here 2 days ago. The police have not stopped what they're doing. In fact, I have raised the idea that what they're doing now, y'all, is they're trying to provoke the population. Yes, that they I think they want to distract folks from the Chauvin trial. So I think that the so-called rank and file cop on the street, I think they're saying to themselves, and they, in fact, I talked to a few young people who pretty much said the cops have said that, like, what are you gonna do? We'll do what we want to do. What are y'all gonna do? And 2 days ago, they grabbed some kid that they thought was a part of a carjacking. Turns out they're the wrong kid. So when the young people came out to try to tell me you got the wrong kid, well, they had actually chased this kid, and the dog bit this kid. So they're trying to force him into the car. The young people say, well, you can't force him can't put him in the car because he can't sit down because your dog bit him. So there's a crowd gathering because one of the problems is they got the wrong person. So the kids had the foresight to call his parents. Parents were on their way. And then the cops decided, well, there's just too many people here. And so they try to take the kid to another street and the kids follow them. So because the kids are like, these are our streets, we got a right to the street. You know what I'm saying? How are you gonna take somebody away and they say we can't be on the street? So the kids challenged the cops. And so in the process of doing that, whoever's filming it, you can see they took the kid who had been bit, they were taking him further up the street, and somehow there was commotion off to the other side. And when the cameraman was able to turn back, we see this bald cop, punching this kid full force who's being held and knocking him down. And then when he gets down on top of him, he's still punching him. And so a few folks had the presence of mind yesterday to call a press conference to denounce it. They're feeling the pressure because the police chief and the mayor felt the need to say, well, we're investigating it and that we're going to discipline somebody. But it feels like, and then in St. Paul, in issuing a no-knock warrant, the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office um, choked a kid that they were trying to grab. And so there was a press conference actually earlier about that. So being a political person trying to interpret the environment and talking to the young people, there's a real sense that they feel like the police are trying to provoke them into doing something, provoke them into returning, which would make sense at some point to return violence for violence. And like Cameron said, I quoted Cameron Clark, Jamar Clark's cousin said that it's like they're trying to get us to attack them so they have an excuse to shoot us. So it's tense here. You can feel it in the air. There's a real tension. If these folks let Chauvin off, there is going to be an explosion unless we can get out in front of it and some of them kind of redirect it. But there's a real sense of tension in the air. And so the other thing that's been going on, and I see that Toshira's on, looks like she'll tell you that we've had several protests. The families have been organizing protests. They organized one in Bemidji on Saturday, and on Sunday there was one for Dalal Eid. So the fight here is a continual thing. We're continually the struggle against police violence in every way that we can, and we have been keeping forward the demands that the police be prosecuted, and we've demanded that the killer cops be jailed, and we continue to demand that all the cases be reopened. So I hope that gives you an idea of what's going on here, and trial wise. And so nobody has any real confidence in the way this trial is going to go. There's a real sense that even the prosecution doesn't have its heart in it. So I don't know how that's going to go, but Attorney General Keith Ellison is under a tremendous amount of pressure. As you know, we know Keith Ellison from years ago when he actually struggled with us, and he called himself an activist. But the lawyers that he has representing the prosecution aren't very passionate. They seem dispassionate. In fact, one of the lawyers was actually a U.S. attorney, and as one of the attorneys here, lawyers said to me, said, he wasn't passionate about equity and being equitable when he was on the other side. He sent a whole lot of black folks to jail. So anyway, so nobody's hoping here. Nobody has any false hopes that this trial is going to go the way of real prosecution. It may, and they may decide to split the difference and make compromise, but the feeling here is that and nobody has any real confidence that that this jury, that the prosecution will even make its case, because that happened in the case of Philando Castile. Miss Castile, felt like Valerie felt like the prosecution's case was argument was sufficient, but personally, I sat through that trial with her, and I had some issues with some of the way that the case was presented. Now, it's easy to second guess them, but I thought there was a thing or two they could have done that may have turned the tide. Maybe not, but they she feels confident they did their best, but eh, I think folks who spend most of their time supporting the police always have a hard time having to turn around and then also indict and prosecute one of their own. So unless there's questions, that's my little report.
All right, thank you, Mel. And we just had joined in the call. See, Toshira Garraway joined, and there you are again. So, um, yeah, you missed a little bit of what Mel said, but we more or less were just trying to get an update on just kind of the mood and the thoughts of surrounding this trial, and then especially from your perspective too, as an impacted family, and just the policing in Minnesota and some of the things that you've been trying to bring to light recently and just in general. So I just want to introduce you, for those who don't know, um, to Shira Garraway. Your fiance was killed by the police, and the father of your child, Justin
Yes.
Teagan. So I'll let you maybe explain that and explain what you've been up to recently and just in general in the Twin
Yes.
Cities area.
Yes. Thank
And thanks
you
for joining the
so
call.
much. Yes. Thank you, Brock. And as Mel, well, first again, yes, I am the mother of Justin Tygan's now almost 15-year-old son. Justin Tygan was brutally beat to death here in the state of Minnesota. He was beaten severely and thrown inside of a trash dumpster here in Minnesota by the St. Paul police. And I am also the founder of an organization called Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence. So I work with a lot of families here in Minnesota, and for over a year now, I have been uh, organizing the families and making sure that our voices are heard, and especially right now with George Floyd happening, it is imperative that we don't sit back and just watch this trial, that we are vigilant as much as possible. Because, like I always say, and we are all saying, that this is not an isolated issue. And they love to isolate it because that takes away the severeness of what is really happening around the world, the United States, and here in the state of Minnesota. And so we have been organizing a bunch of, like Mel said, we just had one for the law. He was killed after George Floyd, a young man, and a Somali young man. And Mel said it correct. We can, in the spirit, we can like literally feel it here. I think that, just as much as good people came out when George Floyd was murdered, I think even the racism is coming out even more. The racial slurs and the it's become more evident. where it was able to be denied before, and also the white privilege has become more uh, just like it's right there. You can't deny it. No one can deny it. We can see it for what it is, and it's time to call it out for what it is. And that is my one of my goals is calling it out for what it is, because I believe that a lot, and we all know. We all know that these are racially motivated murders. I have a relationship, a strong relationship with one of Emmett Till's family member, and she seen the pictures of my son's father and the way that his body was found after he was beaten by police. And she said, I it just makes me look at Minnesota like Mississippi. And she said, this looks like Emmett Till to me. And it's sad because here we are in 2021, and I literally feel like I'm in Mississippi back in 1968. I really do. And that's the feeling. This place is treacherous. um it's scary, and wonder there's no go figure that the light is on Minnesota right now. The biggest cases that we've had probably in history have come in the last few years. If you pay attention, if any of us pay attention to the last high profile cases, they've come from Minnesota. Um, Philando Castile,
Right. That's
Jamar
right.
Clark, and now George Floyd. So it's obvious. It's a problem all over everywhere, but it's a problem in Minnesota. I'm talking about to the point that you can feel this stuff. It's scary.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's really scary, and I just all I know that I can do is just continue to all I know that I can do is continue to tell my truth, continue to fight for what I believe in, and refuse to sit back and watch this and know that my son's father was murdered the same way, and as George Floyd. Um I refuse to do that. And I will be honest with you guys, this place is so treacherous that sometimes I do feel like at some point they will come after me. I do feel like that because I'm on the news, and I'm out here speaking what I feel in my heart is the truth, and speaking what I know is right. I and the root of all of this is evil. But it's either we're going to sit back and just keep taking it, or somebody's going to stand up. And I'm not just fighting for my son's father's life. I'm fighting for every
Right.
black man, every brother that is out here, because I have two brothers, and I all of you guys on this call, what's going on with these racially motivated murders? The police ain't nothing but Ku Klux Klan with badges on. They can't go around with their sheets and stuff anymore. So what do? They go take a training and become a police officer and get sworn in and act out what they wanted to do anyway. And they are brutalizing our children. I just had a friend tell me recently that when he was a little boy, the police here in Minnesota used to just beat him so bad. They beat him so bad that he had blood coming from his mouth, and they would just terrorize him and his friends, the officers that would patrol the area. And he never told his mom, because I mean it was the police, and what was they gonna do? And all of this has been going on. What's going on here in Minnesota is it's no wonder that the light is on Minnesota. And I wish that we could get maybe I wish we could do something similar to the Mother's March, but maybe not like the Mother's March, because it doesn't have to be all mothers. I've noticed in every family, there's always somebody, and it's not necessarily a mother. Even though most of the time it's a mother, it's not always that. Like for Jamar Clark, it's his sisters that are out here fighting. For me, with it's his significant, it's the mother to of his son and his fiance that's fighting. His mother just doesn't have the strength, and I don't blame her or anything, but it's always a different person in each family. For Marcus Golden, it's his aunt that's fighting. You see what I'm saying? So I wish we could do something, because this is the epicenter, because this is where it all started and it's rooted from, with the big uprise. I feel like something else big like that needs to happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Mother's March, but I know things got a little mixed up last time or whatever, but we don't have to go off of that. We can keep going, because this work has to keep going no matter what. And these families got to be coming together from all over everywhere, no matter what. Works So much work still has to be done. So, but yeah, we've been organizing. I'm gonna be quiet, but
Yeah.
um, we've been organizing a lot here. The families. My son's father, Justin, his birthday is in 2 weeks. So we're gonna call an action for that. I already created the event, so it'll be April 11th. And we will be marching from the last place he was seen, I believe, down to the governor's mansion. So that's our next action we got planned. And then I'll keep you guys updated on future stuff.
All right.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
you.
Thank you so much um, for all that you're doing, Toshira. Definitely see you out there making noise. And maybe on that theme that you raised, it's definitely something I know many of us have been talking about in different cities. Just the kind of central role the families uh, play or should play in this movement, and the fact that some of the main concerns families have been raising, like prosecuting the police, reopening the cases, haven't really been centrally pushed by the most prominent protests or groups or whatever, and to try to get the focus of these protests back where it needs to be, to put the pressure on the government to jail these police. They can talk any kind of legislation they want, but if the police aren't going to jail, the problem's not being addressed. So I know there's some upcoming nationwide actions that have been called. One that I know you helped uh, participate in on March 6th. But I agree. I'm sure there'll be more discussion on things that we can be doing to ratchet up the pressure, um, especially as this trial unfolds. Um, Maybe now would be a good time. I wanted to bring in Mac Warren in on this discussion. Part of it is, well, we have a special history here in Boston, but in some ways it's similar to the Twin Cities, where it's not what you would be led to believe. It has a reputation of being a bastion of liberalism, and there was a big civil rights movement, um, in the 50s and the 60s, and big fights to desegregate the schools and everything. They brought in the National Guard to Little Rock, Arkansas back in '57. But you wouldn't know it, but by the mid '70s, they were still trying to desegregate the schools up here in Boston, and it was kind of one of the biggest fights in the country at the time. And we got Mac Warren with us on the call today, who's at the time was one of the main student leaders of this fight. And I guess one thing I wanted to maybe throw in there for you to address, Mac, was just how I guess these liberal governments kind of get away with the most, you know, just blatant brutality somehow. Um, it goes much deeper than what people understand. So I know you could attest to a lot of different ways that it was clear that the government was directly involved in perpetuating the status quo. And so even, people who were in government at the time who were trying to play a side, against segregation were also part of the problem. And, to what degree do we see parallels now with people who so-called, say they want to do something about police brutality or policing, yet, you know, policy seems unchanged. People still getting killed on a daily basis. So I don't know if that's a fair question, if you want to address it, but I just want to involve you in the conversation, and without having to go all the way into all the ins and outs of the busing fight. But feel free to share anything that's relevant to that conversation, because I think it'd be interesting for the audience as well.
Well, Brock, first of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this discussion, and thank Mass Action in general. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to opportunities to try and just do. I mean, damn near 70 years old, man. The thing I can do in life today is to not run around trying to act like I'm gonna be leading something today, but I can make a contribution, and the contribution is to share my experiences. Um, and people take what they can from those experiences, but the important thing is to make sure I share the experiences, and when I do so, I don't soft pedal it. I don't try to I don't I don't tell people what they want to hear. Just tell people what I think, whether it's what they want to hear or not. And that's true for all the major questions in the discussion. But see, with people who are involved in something like mass action, there's a starting point for the discussion that puts it on a totally different political level. It's not like trying to talk to someone who thinks that the most important thing for us to have done in the last 5 months was to run around chasing after one of the politicians of the two major capitalist parties in this country. Wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to talk to someone who think that that's what we should have been doing in the last 5 months. And it's one of the reasons I actually just stepped back, man. I think that I've been through a lot of election years. I think that this election year was the most depoliticizing process I've ever seen in my history of political activity in the last 50 years. Not McGovern, none of it has been as depoliticizing as this thing was. And the way you judge that is by the level of political organization and mobilization that was reached in the world at a certain point in this fight, this unbelievable fight, which originated with all kinds of other things going on, and George Floyd just captured the essence of the question in the minds of tens and tens of millions. It's an unbelievable thing that we went through, and then to see that unfold, to see it unfold in the world, to see it impact people who never had any direct contact with the fight for Black rights in this country, and the way it inspired them all, from New Zealand to the Philippines to the world, man. The impact of this thing is just it's unbelievable. And there is no way a election campaign got rid of that. It did not get rid of it. It diverted people from what they began to learn as they got involved in this movement, but it didn't change them. They didn't change, and they didn't change their minds about mass action, and that's what we have to look forward to. Nothing has changed. The only thing that's changed is that we got waylaid a little bit by this massive, massive election campaign thing, man. It was overwhelming. It was like a steamroller over everything, everybody who pretended that they were on the left, they were Marxists, they were this, they were that. It rolled over all of them and forced everybody to take a stand. And those who took a stand in support of doing something like going after and chasing after Biden, that's all they did. which meant that people like us who wanted to keep on doing what we're doing, whether you supported Biden or not, we were pretty isolated, and we could only do so much. You can't overcome that, man. That's a monster to overcome. And you can make a little progress at different stages of the struggle, which we've done over the last 50 years. But you don't break through it until it's broken through. And that's what I think we're still facing today. We're still facing the possibility of breaking through on this question of basically it's going to boil down to us saying, look, do what you want to with the national election campaign. You vote for who you want to. Nobody cares for all the good it does you. I wouldn't be talking about it all that damn much anyway. But vote for who you want to in the national election. I'm not going to vote for him. I don't support him. I think it's a waste of effort, time, hope, everything. It's a waste of everything to be chasing after these bourgeois politicians. But you do what you want to do. But when you do it, you should think about the fact that the most important thing for you to do is not run in a ballot box and pull the lever for, even if it's a socialist, even if it's someone who calls themselves a working class candidate. Doesn't matter. It's going to be the least important thing you do over a 4-year period. The most important thing you will do in 4 years will not be who you voted for. It will be what else you do over the course of those 4 years. And that's where mass action comes in. That's where the idea of mass action comes in. That's where you begin to teach people what's important in their life. And I just want to mention one. I mean, I'm not gonna go too long. I can, my tendencies, but I'm just trying not to go too long. But I want to mention one thing that I thought was striking about about this last period. What we're going through. We're going through COVID. We're going through all these things. Then all of a sudden, John Lewis dies. Which was a shock to a lot of us. And I mean, I had respect for what John Lewis started out as and what he was a part of, being a leader of SNCC, being a part of some of the most important things that happened in that period in the fight for Black rights. He was right in the center of it, right there with Kwame, Stokely, and all the others. He was right in the thick of it. He was in the middle of it, and they were a left wing of the Black liberation movement. That's what they were. That's what they started out as, and that's what they became. And some of them continued in that direction, and the others went in the direction of the Democratic Party. But the truth is that this civil rights activist, this young John Lewis, when they had to talk about his history, when they had to talk about his contributions, they had to go back to the 50s and the 60s to talk about what his accomplishments were. He spent 30 years in Congress and they had nothing to say about it because he accomplished nothing in Congress.
Right.
He accomplished nothing. They never mentioned what he did except that he was the conscience of Congress. He was the moral conscience of Congress. That means absolutely nothing, man. I think the brother should be celebrated, but I think he should be celebrated for what he accomplished. And what he accomplished was as a young man standing up and fighting and speaking ideas that old people didn't want to hear. And people gonna be the same way today. Young people gonna be the same way today. They couldn't point to anything he did in Congress. Not a single bill. They talked about him messing around with the voting rights question, which is the pet peeve of every liberal Black middle class politician in the country, has been from the very beginning, has been since the defeat of radical Reconstruction. The whole emphasis has been on voting rights. Never been on the organization of the struggle. Last politician in the country has been from the very beginning. Has been. How are we getting this double thing here? The whole emphasis has been on voting rights. Can you hear me? I'm just gonna wrap up.
We can't hear you, Mac. Hold on, just unmute.
Okay.
There, now go ahead.
You got me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I think this whole question of the fight to build a movement is very much connected to the whole question of the history of this thing as well. I think there's a direct connection. If you take a look at what existed in 1974, and you take a look at what exists today, and if you keep in mind the reason for our oppression, which is not because white people are racist. That's not what we oppress. White people, a lot of white people are racist, and that's a fact. But that's not why they did what they did to us with the defeat of radical reconstruction. What they did to us with the defeat of radical reconstruction was put us in a place where we would be a super exploited section of the working class in this country with no rights, no tools to defend ourselves against the encroachment on our humanity on the part of the new capitalist class that started to run this country the minute the Confederacy was defeated and Grant took over as president 4 years after that. Before that, it was a different question. Before that, we actually had something going on. There was radical reconstruction. Before Grant took over, there was something very radical. It was actually revolutionary. But it was done outside of the White House. It was done against the White House, and it was done by the organization of a majority in the houses of government, in Congress and in the Senate. They took the majority. They had veto power over. They could override any veto that Johnson carried out, and that's how they took the federal government from his ass, implemented radical reconstruction. That's how they did it. But they didn't do it out of the White House. They didn't do it with a president. They did it without a president. They did it with the organization and the mobilization of the millions of people in the South, and they did it by keeping the scumbags out of the government after Johnson had allowed them in. They went back and they said, hell no, they don't get to come back. None of these people who were part of the Confederacy get to come back. We're crushing them. We're going to defeat them economically, politically, and otherwise. And that's what they did. The Confederacy did not defeat radical reconstruction. We defeated the Confederacy, our ancestors. And when you run around talking about how a bunch of crackers got together in the South and defeated our ancestors, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not what happened. And then they were not running around waving those damn Confederate flags, and they were not raising the need for slavery again. They were proving themselves to the capitalist class in this country. They were proving that they were worthy of running the South in the interest of the capitalist class. And if they took one step that went outside the framework of what the capitalist class was setting, and it didn't matter what you call yourself, radical Republican, da da da. It didn't matter. If you took one step outside the framework of what they were organizing, you were crushed. You were crushed. Grant was more than willing to use federal troops to go out and crush Native Americans all over the country, to take their lands, to lock them down, and even use us to do it. Use black troops to do it. And you have these liberals running around talking about, oh yeah, if the Native American used to call us Buffalo Soldiers. I don't use that term. Buffalo Soldiers. Yeah, because of the way our hair looked, but it wasn't respect. You were the enemy, you were murdering them. You were locking them down. You were taking them into concentration camps. They didn't see you as heroes. They saw you as a tool of the enemy. And that's the way he used us. That's what Grant did to us. He was willing to do that, but he was not willing to organize a couple 100,000 troops and send them down to the South and crush this thing because they were doing it for them. They were doing it for the capitalist class. It was not in the interest of the South. The South didn't run shit. They weren't running anything then. They haven't run anything since the capitalist guys took over this country. How many presidents have been elected from the South?
Well, hey,
How many
Mac,
Okay, I'll finish up with this.
Got a rope. Yeah, finish up. And hey, can you
this.
bring your camera down a little bit so we can see
okay. Is that better?
Not really.
Oh, see my face.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I'll just finish up with this. And I'll take whatever questions people want to. See, there's a connection between these two things. If you get this wrong about what was really going on with the defeat of Reconstruction, you'll never understand the Democratic and Republican Party. They have never been any different. Even during Reconstruction, it was not any different. It was just a different layer. There was a layer of revolutionaries who were part of the Republican Party, but they took and did what they did outside the framework. They had to do it against the established Republican Party, the established wings, the ones who are more tied to the capitalist class in this country. What they did was against them, even though some of the radicals were capitalists themselves. Even though some of the radicals were capitalists themselves. We've been fighting this fight a long time. The pattern of oppression and exploitation of the African American people started in the early 1870s in this country, and it continues up until today. But the pattern was established then. There would be no equality. There would be no ability to pack up and leave and go wherever you want to like any other farmer. There would be no ability to be a mobile worker as part of the working class in this country. There would be none of that. In fact, they went in the opposite direction. They weren't interested in reinstituting slavery. Hell, they were gonna pay us. They were gonna pay us so little. They would be stupid to be talking about going back to slavery. That's not what they were doing. What they were doing is setting us up in a situation where we were trapped into working the same damn plantation we were forced to work when we were slaves, and we fought it. And that's the most important thing about that history is the fight we waged. And that's a totally separate question. But I think there should be a discussion about this because I think these militias, I think the decisions about how to use the militias when this so-called uprising started will tell you more about how this was not the South that did this. This was Union troops, Republican Party politicians, and it was the federal government. They did this to us, not some crackers from the South. They didn't run shit. But I'll just leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mac. I think it kind of addresses the question I was raising, which was more or less the roots of the racism in the U.S. government, and that it's not necessarily rooted in the South. Um, so the floor is open now for anybody with questions and comments for all our panelists, and anybody on the panel who wants to speak as well. Just call out or call on you and try to keep your comments brief, and we'll try to get as many in as we can. Just want to thank all our guests for giving us their time and their insights.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi.
go ahead.
Hello. This is hi. It's Deani. Deani Tisdale. Mac. Thank you for saying that. Capitalism.
Yep.
This is what this country was founded on, and with that, on the backs of black and brown bodies. I just want to say thank you for that. I did jump on this phone call a little late because I was having some trouble getting through. But in terms of the end game, I'm trying to figure out if there was anything that I missed. That we could always talk about it after the fact, Brock or Tahia, whoever's on there to keep the conversations going. But I just wanted to jump in and say thank you, Mac, for saying that. That is at the end of the day that having conversations with people and helping them understand what is happening in front of them. It stems from that, and there has to be some sense of clarity and simplicity into having these conversations with people. So that's all. I just want to say that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Right. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Can I share one little point?
Go ahead, Mac.
Okay. It's just one thing. Now, when we think about this Boston thing, the thing that strikes me about Boston more than anything else is, historically, we can recognize the Boston struggle for what it was. Okay. It was the last great battle of the old civil rights movement. It was It was a signal of the total retreat of the black middle class leadership in this country away from mass action. That's what Boston was. Even though we were able to build a able to build a massive level of support with the National Student Coalition Against Racism, working with the NAACP and other organizations, built all kinds of support all over the country. But the truth is the black middle class leadership was never enthusiastic about this. Was never enthusiastic about it. And as soon as a few brothers made the mistake of attacking a white person after Lansdowne was attacked in Boston. And I can't remember, I couldn't find my Battle of Boston because I don't know, I have boxes all over the place. But so I couldn't refresh my memory. I didn't have time to refresh my memory totally. But after Lansdowne was attacked and some black kids attacked this white man, the leadership of the black middle class in Boston and throughout the country, with the exception of the leadership of the NAACP and a few local leaders inside Boston and a few local leaders around the country, they all collapsed. And when we were going to have the biggest civil rights march that had been organized in this country since Martin Luther King had been assassinated in Boston, and we had to call it off because the whole leadership of the black movement in this country refused to step forward and say the government is responsible for protecting this demonstration. We didn't do anything to be forced to call this demonstration off. We insist on having it, but eventually, because the middle class leadership retreated from this, we had to call that national demonstration off. And we had thousands of people ready to come to Boston, and this is gonna be a show. It's gonna be mass. But that's what happened with the demonstration. Now I'm raising that because of this. This sister who just got appointed, inherited whatever, mayor of Boston, right? I've heard these stories about how she was she was one of the kids that was riding the school buses with us. And one of the things I wanted to share with everybody tonight is I think the most important thing to come out of the Boston struggle, other than the actual victory of the busing fight itself. And it was a victory. It was not a defeat, even though it didn't go anywhere near as far as it should have and could have. It was a victory, and it should be celebrated. But the thing that I remember most about that struggle, and the thing that struck me about it, um, was the fact that at a certain point in that struggle in Boston, we were able to do something extraordinary, and I don't think we even realized what we had done. And that is, we were able to force the city government of Boston to allow us to organize crisis intervention teams. Now, crisis intervention teams, a bunch of young people like me. I don't know how old was I, 21 years old? And it was a bunch of young people like me who were sanctioned and recognized by the city of Boston to get on the buses with these students and ride these buses into the desegregated schools in Boston. In South, I know I rode a bus to South Boston as a member of the crisis intervention team, and it just so happens that I saved. Can you see that? That I saved my identification as part of the crisis intervention team. See that kid right there? That's actually me. Um, but I say this, and we use this. We could use this to get in any school in Boston, and we could actually try to help these students out, talk to them, and everything else. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is this: the reason we were able to get the city to go along with the recognition of these little political organizations, they were kind of defense oriented organizations, even though we had no way of defending ourselves except politically. But they were defense organizations that were set up to go into these schools with these students. And we forced them to do this not because they had a change of heart about this. We forced them to do this because at a meeting between the leadership of those who were supporting the last march on Boston, in the Battle of Boston, and the city government and the police department and everyone else. There was a certain point in the meeting we had with them where we were very, very upset. I think we were upset about I just can't remember the details. I think it had to do with Carson Beach. And I remember me and some other person, I forget who it was, speaking at this meeting. And I don't know, maybe if I had thought about it, I wouldn't have said it. But I got so frustrated about what they did to us in South Boston High on Carson Beach, till I just finally said, I just said, look, your police are standing around watching these people stand across from us, throwing rocks, throwing bricks and sticks and anything they can get their hands on, injuring people who are standing there doing peaceful protests. I said, people are sick of this. And if you don't start doing your job and arresting these people for attacking us, God damn it, we're going to defend ourselves. And that's what I said at this meeting with Mayor White and all kinds of people there. And somebody else backed it up, some other young person who didn't have sense enough to know you shouldn't do this, like me. Um, but we said this. And after we said this, we had some discussion about what could be done. And this is one of the things that we came up with was this crisis intervention team. And somehow or another, it got recognized. And it was a very, very powerful thing. And drawn directly from the community, not not obliged to discuss anything with the city government itself, not obliged to go through them, not obliged to have anything to do with the cops. It was us and the students and the civil rights organization in Boston. And the reason I raise it is because I think that there's a lot of value to recognizing how important these crisis intervention teams could have been if that struggle had continued in Boston. And I think it's a little bit of an answer to this whole question of defunding the police, black community control of the police, all these things about the police. And I don't think the police can be reformed. I think it has to be abolished. And if you're not talking about abolishing it, don't be trying to trick people into believing somehow or another you can take money from them and they become less powerful. It's not true. Defunding is a trick, man. I mean, it's a political it's a political tool they use to rope people in, but ain't nobody defunding no police. You might as well say, let's just overthrow capitalism. Because you don't have to overthrow capitalism before you get rid of the police. We got to tell people that we can't keep bullshitting about it. And the only people who even raising this thing as a serious thing are people who don't know a damn thing about politics. We're just out and out liberals. That's who's raising it. And they raise it as a diversion because it's going absolutely nowhere. And it results in nothing. And that's only part of the problem with it. The other problem with defunding is any idea of tying our social programs, our social needs. What we need is working people in this country to taking a dollar or two from the police. Man, out of your mind. What we need as a people in this country has absolutely nothing to do with the police. We don't give a damn about how much money they do the police. What we care about is what is going on in relationship to us and what we should be demanding to protect us and how we should be advancing the struggle to defend us on all levels, beginning with this minimum wage thing, but not stopping there at all, including public works program and everything else. I believe the minimum wage fight is probably the most important fight going on in the fight for Black rights today, other than the fight against police murders. The fight for 25 million of our people, 30 or 40 million of our people to graduate from earning $7, $8, and $9 an hour to being able to at least start with the minimum of 15. I mean, that's not a lot to ask, but the truth is, the biggest fight in the world.
Thanks, Max, for your comments. We just want to hear from a few more people. I think we got Sahida's got her hand up, and if Oh, Howard. Okay,
Yeah.
so
I don't know how
Tahia
you put
then.
him up. No, I have to use Zoom, I guess.
Oh yeah, right.
Oh, I got my hand
Yeah,
up.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good tool. So let's go to here, then Howard, then I see Diani got her hand up. All right.
Okay.
Oh, Howard. Okay, so
I don't know how you put
So Howard, Howard, can you please mute yourself? I think you have two things going on at once. And so we're hearing the feedback. Awesome. Thank you. And you're on mute now. Things going on at once. And so we're hearing the feedback.
I got you, Howard. You're on mute.
Okay. Um, so um, so I wanted to kind of do a round robin for the panelists. And if I can get like just a quick, I know it's hard, but like a little 2-minute response. But if our goal is to jail killer cops, and which I'm assuming that everyone here and definitely the panelists agree that that's really what we're going for, to impact um, to really impact and impede what's going on, right? The biggest thing is if you're holding them accountable and making them serve real time, then that kind of gives some pause to their behaviors. In your respective cities, is that mantra being pushed about, jailing killer cops and holding cops accountable? If it is, in what way? And if it's not, what do you think we can do to get there? And I know that that's a deep answer for a short question or response, but it's several of you I wanted to hear from.
I think Mel had to leave, so we just have Shira and Mac here left.
So Toshira, if you could answer first, that would be helpful. Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, my name's Tahia. I am with Mass Action, and I'm also a family member. So I would like to know, when we talk about stopping police brutality and jailing killer cops, what's the best way to do it, and if that mantra is being pushed in your particular area.
Yes, I believe that first of all, that the way to do this is through the laws. And we have 9 bills that are being pushed right now here in Minnesota. And unfortunately, I'm so sorry because after this, I will have to log off because we actually have a meeting tonight regarding those 9 bills. And I have someone that I believe God sent over to our group of families with that he actually writes bills. His name is John McCollin, and he wrote up 9 bills for us, which was the statute of limitation for wrongful death being eliminated. Hold on one. The statute of limitation of wrongful death being eliminated. There should be no time limit on when people can bring forth a lawsuit if their loved one was murdered unjustly. So, um, in addition to that, we have the qualified immunity that we're trying to fight to get rid of. There's a bill written on that. We have the dash cams and the body footage we want released within 24 to 48 hours. Um, we have the no knock warrants where they cannot just show up without, um, an actual warrant and not knocking. So we have a bunch of bills that are being pushed and that have had hearings here in Minnesota, and uh, the change is going to come through the rules changing. The rules are the laws, and the way to get killer cops locked up is if, for an example, let's use the statute of limitation. If we can get these cases that were not able to come forward because their statute of limitation ran out, their time ran out. And time runs out because of typically 3 reasons. One, the families are mourning. and that when their loved one is, when I found out the father of my son was murdered like that, I, his mother and I were mourning, and we also did not understand. We're not thinking about all this other stuff. All we could, I mean, we couldn't even see straight, for God's sakes. Walking into a mortuary, looking at this man beat up like this after a traffic stop that they lied to us about. They never even told us it was a traffic stop. They said he was just missing from a scene of an accident, and we were figuring that stuff out later. So that led us to start trying to do an investigation where they were literally illegally stalling out the evidence that we needed. So that's the second reason the evidence is being stalled out, because they know that people only have 3 years to bring forth a case here in Minnesota, and typically that's the statute around the United States, but not always. But I know here in Minnesota, it's only 3 years. So we got the stalling out of the stuff that we're requesting. We have the families are mourning and don't even understand that they only have 3 years. And then in addition to that, we were experiencing harassment. I've been followed. The police have sat outside of my home, and I was 23 years old at the time, so I was afraid, a young girl, young Black girl with a baby. So with all of those things, the statute of limitation is um is needed to be removed. There should not be a time limit on this stuff. If your loved one was murdered unjustly at the hands of law enforcement and your family have substantial evidence that they can bring forward, they should be allowed to do so. They don't have it for other crimes that, if there's a rape victim, they can come forward. So it should be the same way. So that's what I testified on that bill about 2 weeks ago. So it got a hearing, and it didn't have to go through any other committees, just a judiciary committee. It now is in the it's going on to the House, and so we're fighting for it. We're talking, meeting with different legislators that we know are in the House, uh, with the Democrats here in Minnesota. Of course, then it'll go on to the Senate. I've already talked to the governor here. So he said he claims he's willing to sign off on anything that makes it in front of him to become law when it comes to police accountability bills. So one thing that I thought was important, okay, I need to start having conversations with these people, figuring out who was the elected officials, and who was in the House, who's in the Senate, who's the majority leader, and once I started looking those things up and figuring it out, I started getting email addresses and sending out emails. And then also working with someone that writes up bills, exactly. And the bills are rooted in our family stories. All of the 9 bills that are being fought for right now. So I like I said, it starts with nothing's going to change until the actual rules, which is the laws, change that permit this stuff to happen. And then you do the protest to apply pressure, because that's what protest is for. It's to apply pressure, but apply pressure to what? That means you have to be in the background working on stuff, as well as out there on the forefront with the protest, adding the pressure to what you've been working on in the background. And the background is those conversations. I know sometimes it's hard to have conversations with these people in the political seats, but they're vital. Um, and it's the only way that I see to change things. So maybe the first start to this is, one, finding someone who has that can write up bills for you, that understands the language, then reaching out to the different elected officials that are within the legislation. Sessions typically are every year around this time. I know here in Minnesota, and once a bill gets a hearing, it can be active for 2 years. So you can, if it doesn't make it through, say if our bills don't make it through this session, next year we'll have another chance to fight for it, as long as it gets a hearing. And then the year after that, it'll get a chance to so I believe at least one of these, a couple of these bills are going to make it through this session, actually. And it might be that statute of limitation. That's the most important one to me because that's what ran out for my son's father. And so that is the one that I'm truly, truly fighting for. And if it does get through, then, and I can even have John be on this call with us as well. He can explain this process. But the bills, the laws are the way to the true change. That is where it is rooted from. These people have been permitted to do this through the laws, and we need laws that say that they can't do this and get away with it. So if we talk about jail killer cops, the only way to make that happen is through the laws. And I thank you guys for having me this evening. I'm very grateful. I'm gonna hop off because I gotta hop on a call regarding actually just what I'm talking about. So I love you all. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank
Have
you
a good
very
one.
much, Toshira.
I think I fixed the audio. Okay.
And just as you say that, unfortunately, we weren't able to continue that discussion. But I know I don't entirely agree with what was just said, but um, let's take the next two people who had their hands up, and then we can maybe have a little bit more open discussion before we close out. Um, so we had who? Oh, Howard, and then Deani. So Howard, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, my problem is I tried to join so many times and then I maybe duplicated something. Okay, yeah. In terms of the police, in the 70s, that's when Biden was a leader of the anti-busing, the segregationist movement on a national level as senator. Basically, the police. I know for a fact, because they had meetings in City Hall, Boston City Hall, planning violence in the communities. Like attacking people with baseball bats. That's all planned right out of City Hall with politicians there and everything. But there was a group called the White Citizens Councils, and they had liaison, like they were behind and it's all connected to Ferguson too. I mean, I know that a lot of the violence in Ferguson was through them, because they're based in St. Louis, Missouri. But they were the key people in Boston for the white supremacists, and they were active in the violence. In the Boston City, Boston Patrolmen's Association was part of the in liaison, the White Citizens Councils, which is also called the Uptown Klan. The Uptown Klan is another name for them. So the connection with Ferguson and Missouri, and in Boston, what was going on in the 70s, it's all like interconnected. I know that for a fact. I already showed you the information. I had the evidence of it. I think when at other meetings, I showed it to you before. But it's so the police weren't just not fighting the white supremacists like at Carson Beach. They weren't like sort of passively, taking the side of the white supremacists. They were actually liaison and actively supporting the white supremacists because they were active at their meetings. Because they had two major people for the white citizen councils. There's two key liaison people from Missouri, right in Boston at the time, and the Boston Patrolmen's Association was working with them. I mean, they were directly connected to it. It wasn't like they were passively supporting white supremacy. They were directly tied to it. In Ferguson, as well as Boston, they're all interconnected.
Thanks, Howard. And Deani?
Sorry, may I just two quick questions? One, in the state of Massachusetts, when it comes to statute of limitations, in terms of that and then reopening the cases, I don't know what that looks like. And how that looks like when trying to reopen cases from where I just had that idea just popped up in my head with I forget her name, the wonderful woman from Minnesota.
Toshira.
Toshira. Okay. That was just one question that I had that I just wrote down. And then I didn't really want to go off topic, but we are talking about busing right now. And this is to Mr. Warren. So, did those wins last when you with the the intervention teams? Because my question is, what does desegregation in Boston and schools looking like in 2021? Since those actions in the early 70s.
All right. Why don't I'm gonna take up the first question you raised, and then Mac or anybody else can take up these other ones. But I wanted to respond to something Toshira raised because I don't feel it's entirely accurate. For one, murder's illegal. That law doesn't have to be rewritten. Murder's illegal. It's been illegal for many, many moons. So the problem isn't fundamentally a legal problem in many of these cases. The problem is political. The legal basis already exists to indict, to take a cop to trial. This is not what's going on. Prosecutors are not prosecuting. That's the problem. It has nothing to do with the laws on the books. It has to do with the practice of the prosecutors. Unless you want to make a law that targets prosecutors, that's something that should be discussed. But the statute of limitations has more to do with civil suits, and I think that's really what she was talking about. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt that murder has a statute of limitation in the state of Minnesota. And what happened to her fiance doesn't sound anything like manslaughter. In some cases, manslaughter has a statute of limitations in some states. I think we need to be very careful about arguing to extend the penal code in any frame of, in any fashion, unless it's specifically only restricted to, the police and maybe government officials or something like that. But the minute you give any opening, they're not going to be using it on police. They're going to be using it on anyone but police. So they already have quite a bit in the penal code to handle all of us, 100-fold. So I don't think we need to extend that one iota, in my opinion. But that's a matter of debate. But and that's also should be raised because, and I believe it's done deliberately to confuse people. This idea of qualified immunity. It only deals with civil suits. This idea of immunity, everybody latches onto it thinking, oh, yes, police are immune. And they are. Politically, they're immune. But the laws that are being proposed, the legislature proposes only dealing with civil suits and only federal officers, not local state officers. This is the Breathe Act. This is the Floyd Act. This is the main thing that they're pushing in Congress as a solution today. Now I may be off on that, but I believe that's my reading of the law that's being proposed. And they hang on it because that's the strongest sounding language that they have. But in at the essence, it doesn't even scratch the surface of the problem. And it's done deliberately to confuse and to hoodwink people into thinking that some radical thing's being promoted, which isn't. All right. I guess Mac, if you want to answer the other question, or if any, we can maybe take a last set of questions and wrap up tonight's podcast.
Real quick. Mac, sorry. Because I know we could probably go into the details about that, but I would love to have a conversation about that. If we can exchange info, I would love to hear more about that. And then we could wrap it up. So it's up to you. It's up to you, the host. Okay.
Yeah. Mac, why don't you give us a final thought? You're on mute. Sorry. Gotta unmute yourself.
I think your question was a very important question about this question of the defeat. or the victory, and what happened with the victory of the desegregation battle in Boston. Because I think it was a victory. I think it advanced the community in a tremendous way, and it advanced education. It raised the quality of education for all working people in Boston. It was a powerful thing that this judge was serious as hell. He was determined to do it. What he couldn't do is force white people to stay in the Boston public school system. That's where it got undermined. It didn't get undermined by them being able to force us out of the schools we were assigned to, being able to chase the kids out and put fear into their hearts and have them unwilling to go to school. That didn't happen. There was a victory in the sense that this judge's order went all the way, and he completed the desegregation process in Boston. But the thing breaks down on a social level, especially with the conduct of the Democratic and Republican parties in Boston. That's where it breaks down at. You can have advances. There are no permanent advances in the fight for liberation until you complete the process. Everything else is up for question. You can be doing one step forward and steps back all the time in the struggle itself, as long as you're learning the lessons that are necessary to be learned. The truth is that it was a victory in Boston, but the lessons that were learned didn't even teach people that one, there was a victory, and two, who's responsible for it not advancing any further than what it did. Who's responsible for that? Because I think that if we had a mass movement in Boston, if we had continued it after the calling off of the last national demonstration in Boston, more advances could have been made. They could have been more permanent. They would have had an impact on this question we're talking about today, where you have people talking about how historic it is that this sister got elevated to the mayor of Boston. And we're talking about 50 years after the fight to desegregate the public schools in Boston. The average medium income of African Americans is $8, and the average medium income for a white family in Boston is over 250,000. What the hell is that? Where's the progress? And the fact that there's a little black middle class that's sitting on top of everything in politics and in society, the fact that there's a little black middle class that's parading itself around pretending that they represent our progress, that their accomplishments are our accomplishments, that their income is our income, which they don't share anything on that level. But the truth is that they have nothing to do with us. They have nothing to do with us. It does not advance our struggle for the black middle class to be more established, for it to establish itself, for it to advance its interests. We don't get anything out of it. There's no trickle down to us. Nothing trickles. There's nothing for working people. We got to keep it in mind. Our struggle is to change the condition of life for the people who were driven down to nothing with the defeat of radical Reconstruction. That's been the struggle from the very beginning. It's never been about how big the black middle class is, how many of these Negroes are in the middle class. It's never been about that. They didn't give a shit whether there was some black middle class Negroes. There's always been. Under slavery, there were black middle class Negroes in this country. All the way through Jim Crow. Always been. And they have always been the most conservative amongst us. And they have always been the ones who stood up and told us it's the law that's important, not the struggle. But we had the law. We had the most important law in our lives with when the radical reconstructions pushed through the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Congress should not abridge the rights under any circumstances of African Americans. The whole thing, the 14th Amendment. The 15th Amendment is a reaffirmation of what the 14th Amendment really was. The 14th Amendment is where our rights are embodied in the law, in the Constitution. It's the 14th Amendment, the one that guarantees us equal rights under the law. And every civil rights bill, every voting rights act, everything that comes after that has very little meaning compared to the 14th Amendment. 13th are kind of important too. Those are our amendments, the 13th and the 14th, abolishing slavery and guaranteeing us equal rights under the law. Those are our amendments. The 15th Amendment, that belongs to the Democratic and Republican parties. That's what they use to get us to vote for them. But they don't do anything about our conditions in life. That's their amendment. That's what all you hear about, all they talk about, all Brother Lewis did in Congress is talk about this because that's their amendment. That's the one that guarantees they get elected to office, but guarantees us absolutely nothing. We work for $7 an hour. Working people who are black, who are 95% of us. We work for $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour. We don't live their life. That's not us. It don't guarantee anything for us. So our fight is to advance our program, advance our perspective, a working class perspective, a working class leadership, which will organize and mobilize people democratically to think, to discuss, to understand from the beginning how we got into this mess, who's responsible for it. We got into this mess not because some crackers who wanted to reinstitute the Confederacy or wanted to continue slavery decided to overthrow Jim Crow. We got into it because the federal government went along with it. The politicians and the Republican politicians in the South who were supposed to be our allies would rather ally with the Democratic Party against us than to let us get into those damn militia stations and get our weapons to defend ourselves, which we had during radical Reconstruction. We had militias all over the place. And they were trained and they were fighters, but they could not get their weapons, which is why they were defeated. Not because these crackers whipped our butts. Come on. But this is what they teach us. This is what they teach us.
Well, we're definitely gonna have to come back to some of these themes and thoughts and discussion. I want to thank everyone for being a part of the podcast this weekend and or this week. Next week, we do plan to get into some of the current debates that are going on around Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, the organization, funding, clout chasing, and which way forward for the movement. So stay tuned for that next Friday. Should be an interesting episode. And thanks everybody once again. Want to thank all our panelists, Mac Warren, Mel Reeves, and Toshira Garraway. And yeah, we'll definitely want to bring Mac back again, for some other
Mel for me too, man. Tell Mel I didn't get to say hi to Mel.
I will do that.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Till next week, then.
Later.
Mass action.
Mass action.
Mass action.
Stay tuned for more national actions coming up. Yep. Oh, actually, before we leave, I gotta share this. Yes. Before we leave, we got this coming up in Boston on Monday. It's the 36th birthday. Terrence Coleman. Coleman family's been one of the most outspoken here in this city, trying to expose the crimes of the police and the collusion of the government in the Boston area. So everyone, please spread the word. Come out if you can and support. We continue to demand reopening the case and to jail the killer cops. So,
Brock, real quick, where else can I get that flyer? Is it up on Facebook right now, or are you just sharing it right now for Monday?
It's on Facebook, and I can send you a copy too.
Okay, all right, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep. And I guess with that, we'll leave the regular scheduled program. All and right. Till next week, y'all.
That's
okay, wait a minute. I was supposed to give my information. I forgot. That's okay, I'll do it. All right, y'all. Later.
Later, y'all.
No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. Please. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. Please. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. No justice, no peace. Please. Prosecute the police. Please. No justice, no peace. Prosecute the police. No justice, no peace. Hey. Prosecute the police. Hey. No justice, no peace. Yeah. Prosecute the police. Yeah. No justice, no peace. Yeah. Prosecute the police. Yeah. No justice, no peace. Yeah.